All right, I think we'll get started. So first of all, good morning to everyone, and thanks so much for coming. I know yesterday was YouTube party, and I hope you guys had a fun time, and so much glad that you are here. So yeah, we are going to speak about Lightning Out today, introduction to Lightning Out. And let me introduce myself. My name is Mohit Srivastava, and I'm a Salesforce MVP, as well as I work for an awesome company called Code Science Inc. I work as a Salesforce engineer there. Primarily, we were founded in 2008. We are 75 employees now. We have offices in Chattanooga and San Francisco. We focus on helping ISVs to get their apps on an app exchange. So we have built more than 90 plus products on an app exchange, help them to go through the security review, and all the, help them to build and market out solutions. Our clients range from Fortune 500 to startups, 5% startups as well. And we go by this logo that your SaaS is in our hands. So what we mean by that is we empower the SaaS business, by providing our professional services there. We are a Lightning certified PDO and been following Lightning quite a while now. And also we have customers who we have helped them to get their apps Lightning certified. You can follow us at Code Science on our Twitter handle. So yes, after that introduction, we are finally. So forward-looking statement, right? Do not make any purchasing decisions based on some of the forward-looking statements that I may make. That may also put me in risk because I'm a Salesforce MVP, and to answer some of your questions, I may already have some insights from what the product team is working on. So I may make some statements, so it won't be a smartest move of your money if you try to make purchasing decisions based on forward-looking statements. So always look at the current product offerings and do make decisions based on that. All right, after this, now let's get to the meat of the presentation here. So we're going to talk about Lightning Out. So Lightning in Salesforce, right? It is referred everywhere, right? We have, it's like everything goes Lightning. Like if you look at Marketing Cloud, right, it's going into Lightning. So Lightning is very common term that's been used in Salesforce, and that's why it has been wrongly interpreted. Like, people don't understand what is a component framework and what is Lightning experience, right? So I just want to make sure that we start with, although my topic is not on Lightning, Lightning in general, but I'm going to speak about Lightning Out, which is a technology to take your Lightning components that you already built for your Lightning experience or SF1 to the outside world. So I just want to make sure that we know that we are speaking about Lightning Out, which is a part of Lightning, but as a part of this presentation, we are not going to cover in depth about Lightning. We're going to cover in depth about Lightning Out and introduce you to that technology. So before we begin, it's important to understand Lightning Component Framework. Some of you would have already got a chance to work on this. Some might not. So I thought I'll spend some couple of slides just going through the basics of it so that we are all set to understand Lightning Out in more depth. So Lightning Component Framework, right? So when I started with Salesforce, right, I started with S controls, which was like five and a half years back. We were writing everything in client side, and we were calling as an AJAX functions, our backend functions. And then Visual Force, and now, so what happened with Visual Force is developers kept writing, a long monolithic code, which was hard to maintain and reuse, basically. And as the web component framework emerged as one of the component frameworks technology, you saw a lot of frameworks like Angular, React, Ember. Those were used to build single page apps on the platform, right? And Salesforce had to take that, they had to re-engineer their stuff so that they can support those single page applications. So Visual Force essentially was not built to build single page applications. Like, it was not supposed to be used to build spas. It was supposed to be built using tabbed concept where you load every page from the server. While in SPA technology, you don't load your web page server. You always have a single page and you just use AJAX to make callouts, and you never load your page. So Lightning Component Framework is a framework from Salesforce where it's a JavaScript framework. So it is primarily used everywhere now. So so there are standard components that Salesforce provides. There is a framework by which you can build your own components and use that in your SF1 app or in your Lightning experience or in any of these that I've listed there. Like once you build component, it's like reusable across different things. Like I don't know how many of you have working already on new communities or Lightning Bolt. They are all using Lightning component framework, to build applications. So these are some of the places by which we can use Lightning component framework. What we're gonna take a look at in this presentation primarily is we will focus on how can we take these components that we build for our SF1 or internal Salesforce applications, and how can we take it outside Salesforce? Now let's say I'm running a SharePoint site, right? How can I take that particular component and take it outside my platform? Now I don't want to be just running that, the component only inside Salesforce, right? So we're gonna take a use case of that, see how we are, trying to take that outside the platform. So before we dig into more, I would also like to introduce you to SLDS. So SLDS is a design system primarily meant to keep the uniformity, right? So that your developers and your designers are on the same, on the same pace. And we follow the same set of, design patterns that Salesforce has been following for their apps. So it's an open source CSS framework. Again, you can go to SLDS website and look at some of the markups or the design patterns there, and that should be our primarily CSS framework to build our UI. So just getting introduced to that. All right. So now, having covered these Lightning components, let's look at one of the custom Lightning component that I've built, as a part of presentation for this, and we're going to take a look at how we can take this component outside the platform. So I have a simple component which basically displays a list, a list of salespeople based on the revenue that they have generated for this particular quarter, based on the opportunity. So this is a simple component again to show the actual, what you can do with the builder is basically it's a component, so you can drag and drop using the Lightning builder. So as you can see, everything here is component, and this is one of my components that I've built. So it's a simple drag and drop. So I had a component leaderboard main, and I just dragged it here, and that's how I've got this component. Now again, what we're going to concentrate here is how can we actually take, so you would have spent some time building it, right? Probably half a sprint or a sprint, to build these functionalities, like, showing up a model, and showing up this list, and you don't want to rebuild it again. Let's say I want to use this leaderboard in my Heroku app or a Node app which is running outside the platform, right? And there are sales reps who are using those applications as well apart from Salesforce. So we don't want them to iframe this, because iframe from security perspective has a lot of disadvantages like clickjack, the security threat. So there is secure way of you can take this component outside the platform. And by security, I also mean that how do we respect, the CRUD FLS that admin has configured for your apps? How do we respect that sharing module, right? For example, this dashboard should be only visible to certain set of, role hierarchy. That's what is set by your administrators, right? So you want to follow those as well as you take these components outside. And that's where iframing it is not a solution. Iframing this as outside the platform is not going to work out. So let me actually just show you what is a Lightning component bundle. So basically what happens is every component that we see on the screen is divided into bundles in Lightning component framework. So what you can see is, for example, my sales leaderboard component, right? So every bundle will have, digging a little bit into the code. Some of you might be developers here, so might be interested in looking into the code of what it looks like. So a component framework, right? It gives you that particular bundle where what you can do is you can create your own CSS for that particular component. So for example, sales leaderboard component, right? So this is my main component, which is comprising of two different components, which is the board that we see and the detail component. That is when I clicked on that particular the modal opened, right? So which in itself is a component. Now when I look at the sales leaderboard component in detail, what I will see is it's also made up of a listed, list component, which is iterated over another single component. So every card itself can be a component. So we again divide that into a component, which is our sales leaderboard card. So if you look at, we have another component called sales leaderboard card, right? So this is our main component. So inside sales leaderboard card also, you will see that I would have used components if it is possible to break my UI into different components. So the idea here is, in Visualforce, you don't imagine your page as different set of components. But in component framework, you try to break it as much as possible so that every single bit can be reused. So for example, let's say I have a component called detail. If you look at this, I might have an SVG tag here somewhere. So SVG itself is a component, right? So I would like to keep it separate because I may want to use that SVG icon somewhere else as well, right? So I might have created an SVG component and I might be using that component as a component model. So this is an introduction for to start with what is Lightning and how you can build components. Again, I don't want to dig. You can go to Trailhead and other resources because that's not the topic for this conversation. We're going to look at some of the external systems on how I can use this as a how I can take this component now outside the platform. So let's move on and cover some of the theoretical aspects of it before actually I dig into some of the code. So just key takeaways from whatever we saw in the demo that, components are basically, they'll have interfaces where you can decide, okay, where I want to place that component, right? So for example, community builder you will have a separate interface for that. And similarly, app builder has a separate interface. So you can use multiple of them in your components. And then events are basically, that is how you communicate between two components. Now let's say I want to click on one of the component and open a modal, right? So that click event is nothing but an event here, and we capture that particular event, and based on that we take actions, or the other component can communicate with each other. So events in Lightning is like it's a basic thing. If you start imagining in traditional Visualforce way of how events work and how in Lightning the importance of events, you will see that more you understand this application events and component events, more you follow closely with what is expected out of the component framework. So let's move on to Lightning Out, right? So this is the meat of our topic. Lightning Out is, we want to take these components outside Salesforce, we want to make it completely secure, and we want to reuse this component. In fact, one of the challenges has been, okay, we built this Lightning components, how can we take it inside Visualforce, right? So that is also powered by Lightning Out in general, and we're going to take a look at some of the code on how to do this Lightning Out. So let me tell you some of the Lightning Out requirements, like what are the basic requirements that your web server or your external system should have to make use of this technology. So these are the basic primary requirements. So your web container must be able to understand these languages like HTML and CSS, which are pretty basic, and your web container can be served on the browser. The other thing that we will see is, here we are concerned with security, right? So there must be a mechanism to get the session ID, right? So that is where the OAuth or the connected app in Salesforce will come into picture, and we'll talk more about that as we look at Heroku examples and the SharePoint examples that I have for this demo. Ability to reach Salesforce, right? Because of the security, your servers may be behind the firewall. So there needs to be some work on your external server to provide an access to the internet or the outside world. Like these are like very primary requirements for Lightning Out, and I think most of the apps do follow these. But if your app is like using some older technologies, it might be worth to look at these things, that your external server actually obeys all these three prerequisites, so that you can start thinking of building Lightning Out components. All right, so I'm not going to actually get into this in depth because I'm going to straight away jump into the demo and show you how it works, and then we're going to come back and see what exactly I did to make things work outside the platform, right? So let me do this. So I have a Heroku. How many of you are using Heroku here? Yes, great. So Heroku is a new way to deploy your apps, right? Whether you are using PHP or Node or in fact Java or Ruby, right? So Heroku supports all this. So for this demonstration, what I've done is I have built a Node app, which basically what it does is it takes these Lightning components that I've built, outside the Salesforce. So let's look at this app actually. So I'm going to open this app. Hopefully the Heroku containers are running faster today. There you go. So it logged into the Salesforce and it displayed the same Lightning component that I had built for my Lightning experience, right? So what I've done here is I've taken this component. Now it is not running on Salesforce anymore. So as you can look at the URL, I'm on a Heroku and it is a Node application. It's no more a Salesforce application, but it is the same component. And in fact, all the functionalities that particular component provided, it actually took you. So one of the things that we did not observe here was how do I authenticate it to it? So if you would have closely observed, it actually went through the OAuth flow, and because I was already logged into my browser, right? It just identified that, okay, I'm logged into the Salesforce, and it just took the session and went from there. But if I would have logged out of the Salesforce and run this application, it would have gone to the Salesforce login screen, asked for my credentials, and based on whatever access rights that I have, it would have displayed the data, right? We're going to look at that for another example where I explicitly go through the OAuth flow. So in connected app, right? So yeah, this provides me an opportunity to actually get into explaining on how do I take this as a Lightning out component. So the primarily first thing that we do is we create a connected app. As you can see, we create a connected app. So in Salesforce world, right? Let me switch back to classic a bit here to go to connected app. So connected app is a way by which your external app can communicate with Salesforce, or at least identify what are the access rights that I have and what is the user session that it should be linked to. So if I go to my setup and I go to my connected app here in Salesforce, okay, so let me go to apps actually. So you go to apps here, you go to apps, you go to the connected app session. So this is where I have built my connected app. So as you can see, so connected app gives you a consumer key and client secret ID, and you define your OAuth scopes, and you whitelist your callback URLs here, right? Or the redirect URL where you want. So for example, in my case, I have that Heroku URL here and the SharePoint URL where I take this component outside the Salesforce platform. So the first thing that you do to make your Lightning out work is to create a connected app. Now it cannot work without a connected app. That is because you want to securely do a connection between that app and this app. The other way by which you can avoid this is if you have some mechanism to get the session ID. That can be through the SOAP login call, if you are aware of that, or a REST call. Again, REST uses OAuth in the back end. So you create a connected app. That's the first step that we do in the Lightning out. And the second step is so once the connected app is created, right, you still want to protect your resources, right? So you have to create something called as cross-origin request, because JavaScript principles does not allow you to make a call out to an external URL which is different than your original domain URL. So what I mean by that is, if you look at this, my URL is at SEDream something, right? And my Heroku is at a different domain URL, right? So what JavaScript or the browser security does is it does not allow you to actually make that call. That's the security principle. So what Salesforce does is they provide something called as CORS now, which is you whitelist the URLs that you want to actually allow your app. So your admins can configure that, and that way you have the control. So I whitelist a couple of the URLs that I've used for my demo, the external URLs. So that's the other thing, to whitelist these. So that's the second step. And the third very important step is to create a dependency out app. Okay, so what is this dependency out app? We have to actually get into the code to see this. So let's go to one of the components. So this is called as okay, not this. Just hang on for a minute. Yeah, so this one. All right. So this is called as dependency app. Now, what is a dependency app? Here is So we create an application and say, okay, what are the components or what are the dependencies? We define all the dependencies list of the component. Now it can be a top hierarchy as well. In my case, the leaderboard main was the component. So I defined it, and then you provide an access. So basically you use this name, that is Sales Leaderboard VF app that I call it as. You use this name in your JavaScript code that we're going to take a look at. We use that name. So it is important to create this app and make it explicitly extend this using this interface called as LTNG out app. So that is your third step. So just to summarize, you create your connected app. First step, you whitelist your CORS, and the third step is you actually create your dependency app. Right? So these are the primary three things that you do it to take your Lightning component outside the platform. Now, when I mean by a component, it's very generic. Like a component can be a collection of components in itself, right? So you can imagine an app in itself and exposing that app. Now that app may be made up of different components, right? So that can be wrapped around in a single component, and you can expose that components outside the Salesforce. So these are the three things. So let's actually get into the node code a bit. So let me see if I can open the node folder here. So as you can notice, I'm using something called as VS Code editor. How many of you are using this? So at Code Science, we built a Force code. One of our developers, John Nelson, he has built a Force code. What it does is it's an extension or basically an IDE on top of Visual Studio Code editor. Because we do a lot of JavaScript work, we want our JavaScript work as well as the Salesforce Apex code all to sit in inside one single IDE to have a right developer experience and not allow the developer to switch between different resources, right? So that's why we felt that the Visual Studio Code editor is on the on the emerging side, and a lot of all other frameworks are using this Visual Studio Code editor, and all the JavaScript developers are using it. So we built a plugin for that. You can actually get it from the marketplace in Visual Studio Code. So I'm using that. So let me open the node file here. So let's open the node project here. So I will be sharing all the code here on my GitHub repo. And in fact, let me blow a bit. So I'll be sharing all the code in my GitHub repo, and you can actually refer, fork it, or do some modifications. But let's take a look at this Node app. So Node, again, Node is it's an asynchronous JavaScript at the end. Like if you are a JavaScript developer, you should learn Node by now, because it's been used in almost all the technologies. Even embedded systems are using it. So as you can see here, what I have done is, so to create the Lightning out, first I have to go through the OAuth flow. So I might have imported a library, a Node package library basically. Maybe this does not show because it is pulled from the Git. But once you compile this package.json, you will see that there is a Node library that I've used to do this OAuth flow. So you define basically your endpoint URLs, your OAuth token mechanisms. Like you go through that OAuth dance flow and get that code and actually get the endpoint URI. So let's look at the Lightning out code, like what amount of code is required to actually get the Lightning out working. So this is the only piece of the code that is required to take your component outside the Salesforce. It is a very simple JavaScript which expects, so this is the dependency app. It expects a namespace. I think if you don't use the namespace, because my org was namespace, I just used it. But if you don't have namespace, you can just use C is the general namespace. So you use the dependency app that I created, name of that, and the component that you want to create. That is the sales leaderboard main, which was comprised of two different components. And then you say, okay, where do I want to place this, place this Lightning out app or the Lightning out component, right? So that is on the, so you define the div ID basically. So I have a div called leaderboard here, so I define that here. So where exactly that needs to be. And then I have an asynchronous callback where you can do more cool stuff. Like let's say you want to further write some components, right? Or further change some styling or do some JavaScript manipulation on top of that component, right? So it is only this piece of the code that you write, to take your component outside the platform. So it is very basic JavaScript code that any developer who is familiar with the JavaScript, right? He need not be familiar with Salesforce at all. If he follows all these patterns and just use this lighting out code, he should be able to get that component outside the platform or in his own language. Might be a PHP, might be a Node, might be a SharePoint that we're going to take a look at next. Might be anything like that, which is running on JavaScript basically. And so you can take that component outside the platform. All right, so we're going to also look at one more example, which is more interesting actually. So how many of you use SharePoint? Awesome. So SharePoint is a Microsoft technology. Again, a lot of people use it. So think about Office 365 plugins, right? So think about you have a CTI in your lightning out. Like you have built a CTI lightning component, right? Let's say your sales rep or a service rep are actually using something like SharePoint, right? And you have already built that component. Now, how do I actually build a plugin, right, that can be deployed across, as a standalone app or outside the cloud using the lightning out technology? Because lightning out allows you to take your component outside the platform. In fact, I have examples where I've used lightning out on Google Docs, like for address lookups, right? So lightning out is basically, so let's take another example here. So I have built a SharePoint plugin here that I just want to demo it. So let's go to this application actually. So as you can see, now I want to explicitly show what is actually the OAuth flow and how it works, right? So I would have created the dependency app, I would have created all these, CORS whitelisting for this particular domain. So let's log into Salesforce now. So I have a button here which actually takes me to a OAuth flow. Since I'm already logged in, it's just asking me to authorize this app, right? So you say, okay, just allow this authorization here, right? So you will see. So I've just created another button so that I want to explicitly show or call that particular JavaScript. I could have called it on the load, but I just want to make it sure that, I want to show and do a click. So you see the same sales leaderboard that I had, on my Lightning experience delivered outside, outside the platform in a SharePoint site, right? Now, the coolest thing that what I observed with this was, if you look at, so now this can be deployed as a plugin from the SharePoint developer site. So it is just like a managed package apps that we built for Salesforce. How many of you are familiar with managed packages, right? So you get a link, you just install it. So similar thing here, So we built a plugin which can be deployed anywhere. So all these things, so I've used something called as Napa Office Cloud because I did not want it to actually work locally because I think I'm born in cloud. Because I always have been working on, directly on the internet. So, I did not want to actually use it. So I figured out there is a way by which you can do, which is called Napa Clouds. So it's a bit buggy at this point because I think, so let it work. Actually, it takes some time because it has to boot up the entire source directory of my code. So once it boots up, I think I'll be able to show it. But let's continue on our talk. And I think, because it's a development IDE, it will take some time. And depending on the network speed, but let it come and then I can actually walk through the code. I think it came just now. All right, perfect. So it came here. So this is my project basically, which looks like a folder, just like how it looks in the other environments. So as you can see, it almost looks like a Visual Studio Code editor, but this is on the server, right? So if you look at my scripts, so app.js, so force.js is basically, again, a JavaScript library that was written by Skip Solves, one of the evangelists at Salesforce, and I took and modified some of the things there. So I've written a OAuth library so that it's a very generic and it can be used, to do your OAuth flow. So I'll share that link as well. It's a public project shared on SharePoint, so you can get access to this and use it for all your OAuth flows. So here, if you look at app.js, this is where the magic is happening. And let me blow up a bit here so that it's clear. So again, the same thing. I mean, the script is going to be same, irrespective of the language. So again, this is JavaScript. We say, okay, we use this create component. We pass in the, we pass in the component and the dev ID of this. and I would have taken care of defining my app ID and the app name, right? The loan app, which is the name of just the name variable here, which is nothing but my lightning out dependency app name, right? The same concepts actually taking care of these things. So yeah, so this is just an example. Again, it's broader use case. You can think of a lot of use cases where you want to actually build a component inside the platform, but take it outside the platform, like SharePoint or a Node server or your PHP servers or whatever. So there are a couple of more slides, and we'll try to cover some of the things that's been added actually. So one of the problems that I've seen is, what if you want to modify the design, right? What if you don't want to follow SLDS, right? So SLDS comes inbuilt in Salesforce. Like for example, I don't have to import the library anymore. If I'm building a Lightning App Builder app or a Community Builder app, you will see that you can directly use those style classes without putting them in static resources, right? So if you look at this, how do I, change my styling? So in that case, we have this new thing added called as out app unstyled extension. So just like how you extended, how we extended this. How we extended, I think I'll have to switch the editor, just give me a moment. All right, there we go. Visual Studio Code Editor just takes a little bit of. All right, so if you look at this, right? So you can define this as unstyled here. So if you define it as unstyled, none of the styles get carried, or only your data and only your data comes out, and then you can and your structure, and then you can actually overwrite and create your own styles, right? So I think I'm pretty much done with whatever I had. So I will open up a floor for taking some questions. And here are some of the things. Like my code that I've used is completely open source and it's on your Git. So just grab it. And even the code for the SharePoint, right? It's publicly available. So you just click that URL and you will see the Napa Cloud opening all those codes. So I've shared all those things. So I'll open the floor for questions. Sure, please.
Yeah, does it work for, you have users that are community users as well as Salesforce users?
That's a great question actually. So yes, so the answer is yes. It works for your community users as well, but you got to be handling your OAuth in that fashion. Like there will be change in the OAuth library. You will have to explicitly go and explore my library and make some changes as per your community URL, so that you actually go through the OAuth flow. But yes, it does work for your communities as well. Sure, please.
Assuming you have already a single page layout, custom built UI, probably used React components.
Mm-hmm.
What I wonder is there a chance using Lightning out to slightly integrate single components into already existing UI?
Okay, so let me repeat the question because this is very, very interesting question. Thanks for bringing it up. So the question is, what if I use external, JavaScript frameworks like React or Angular and build my components, and I want to use Lightning out to out that using Lightning out, right? Well, technically it is possible, but because React and Angular have their own rendering cycles and Lightning components follow, its own rendering cycle mechanism, it might be very tricky to actually get it done. And if you are hosting this on an app exchange or something like that, right, the security review team is gonna say no to it, because officially till now, I think React and Angulars are not allowed, when you are building your Lightning components at this point. But I'm sure they are, again, safe harbor, but they are working on exposing that as well. So.
I think it's clear that we can't use. I heard that confirmation recently that it's not allowed to use.
Yes.
Build Lightning components. The question is, can I use a Lightning component as a piece of the UI? This means
Yes, that you can use it. Sorry, I think I did not get your question properly. Yes, the answer is yes. So let's say you have a React site, right, and you want to take Lightning out, you can definitely do it, but your challenge will be again to go through that OAuth flow, right? So how do you actually want to manage that? Which means your React site should somehow actually do the OAuth before you actually spin up the whole site, or the user is on the whole site, right? Yeah, so once he is logged in and has access to the Salesforce session ID, then I think yes. I mean, it's just a piece of a small JavaScript code and it will work. Yeah, please. Again, okay, so the question here is, can I use Lightning for Cloud Jira and things like that, right? So the answer is, again, yes, you can use it, provided it follows all those 3 requirements that I mentioned earlier, that it, I don't know about that technology like Cloud Jira, but if it supports HTML and JS, and if it has a way to call the external web service, then it should theoretically work all good. But again, I have not tried it personally, so you might run into issues, but would love to know, how that goes. Sure, please.
So, can you pass a user as the user that is being run on the Lightning Out so that the person doesn't have to log in?
So the person does not have to log in?
Right.
Yes. So yes, theoretically it is possible. You will have to do something called a single sign-on between that system and Salesforce, because somewhere you want to get the user ID, right? So either there must be a mechanism or an integration user or a common user where the common user actually makes a call out at the back end and gets the session ID, yeah, so theoretically, yes. I mean, if you do a single sign-on between the 2 systems, you don't have to go through the OAuth flow because you are already logged in. If you logged in into one system, that means your cookies of the browser recognize the other system as well. So it should just seamlessly work.
But you can't pass like an API user as the user.
You can. So OAuth, so the OAuth flow that we are following here is web server flow, but there is an user password flow as well in the OAuth. So as long as you get the session ID, so in the user password flow, right, you don't need to actually go through the OAuth dance. So in the backend, you can pass the username, password, and the security token and call an API. This is the login OAuth 2 URL, and just exchange for an access token, which is your session ID. So theoretically, yes, it is definitely doable. Sure, please.
Can you take a data source when you come out of the Lightning Out? Suppose we deploy the application to Heroku, and we have the Heroku connect and we have data into Heroku. I want to show the data which is coming from Heroku only when I add in Heroku. While in Salesforce, I should take data from Salesforce.
Yeah, so the question, if I understand, is you want to use other databases and use the UI of the component, right? Technically not with Lightning Out, but if you look at Lightning Out, right, it is made from the Aura platform, right? So instead, I would suggest you to make an Aura app, not a Java or a Node Aura app. Use the Aura framework directly, right, so that you get access to all those things. You get access to more flexibility, in terms of connecting to different databases and things like that. But I don't think Lightning Out is basically meant to extend your thing, So one more thing I wanted to actually forgot to show, and let me see what is the time. Okay, we have 2 more minutes, so let me actually quickly show you that. So let's say I want to use that component that I built on Visualforce page, right? So this is my Visualforce code actually. I was trying this on a Visualforce page. So how can I expose that leaderboard on a Visualforce, right? Because Visualforce is the technology that we have been using it, and I've built a Lightning component. How can I do that? So it is very simple actually. So the same principles, you create the out app and use the same script here, but you just include this tag called as include Lightning. So when I preview this, I should be able to see the same Lightning, the Lightning component rendering here on a Visualforce as well. So Visualforce, Lightning Out powers a lot of things, even for, so when you think about external server, right, it's a Visualforce is also a mechanism of external server, right? So you can use a simple tag like include Lightning, and even you don't need the style sheets anymore, I guess, because now in winter 17, my org is still in summer. In winter 17, the SLDS is automatically imported once you import with, extend SLDS or LNTG out interface, right? So you should be able to pretty much get this one. All right, I will take one more question. Yes, sure, sir.
Can you use Lightning Out in Visualforce pages on Salesforce sites, which lets you serve pages outside the board via public access?
That's a great question. So just to repeat the question is, can I use Lightning Out on a site, right? A site. So it is not possible at this point to take your lightning out on a site, simply because the way the lightning out entire thing works is it requires a session ID, and the anonymous session user ID doesn't work currently with the lightning out. So it will work with like small licenses like community licenses or login licenses, but I don't think at this point it's been exposed as far as.
Safe harbor, do you know if that's on the roadmap?
Safe harbor, well, I did not see that in the roadmap. So sure, sir. Yeah. So basically, you will create an integration user at the back end. So when your app is spinning, right, the first step you do is make a call out to that OAuth URL and get the OAuth token and store it somewhere securely, and then use that OAuth token in your lightning out, the parameter. So it's basically a parameter. The lightning out script expects a session ID parameter. That's it. That's a great solution. Yes, you can do it, but technically you are consuming a license, right? You are no more a site user then. All right, I think thank you so much for coming again. Thanks so much, and thank you for your time.